I wanted to put a quick disclaimer at the start of this episode to let everybody know that the audio quality is going to be slightly different than usual. The person that I interview in this week's episode actually had the privilege to be able to be out in a cafe whilst he was speaking to me. And although that's not something all of us can experience at the moment because of lockdown, it was refreshing to hear the hustle and bustle of everyday life going on behind this person as we talked. But I just wanted to put that disclaimer at the beginning of this episode that the audio quality is going to be slightly bad, and I apologise in advance for this. Hello listeners, and welcome to this week's episode of the Cult Vault. In today's episode we are going to be looking into a strange movement that originated out of Korea. What makes this movement strange? Well, they don't tell their participants who they are until 6 months after they've joined. Before we get started, I just wanted to inform you all of some upcoming adjustments to the show. As some of you may have realised, we aren't just covering cults on this show anymore, we're also looking at conspiracies and high controlling groups. Also, I've been lucky enough to gain some sponsorships over the next few episodes, so there may be an extra ad or two included over the month of March. If you would like to contribute to the podcast, following me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod is very helpful. Leaving a 5-star review is even more helpful. And supporting me at patreon.com/thecultvault for as little as £1 a month helps me to continue podcasting every day. But that's enough of business. Here is Han with his story of life within Shincheonji.
All right.
So hi Han, and welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining me today. This episode today is going to be on a subject that has been highly requested, but it's not something that I know too much about. So you're going to be one of a number of people I interview on this topic, and I am looking forward to listening to your stories to learn a bit more. So would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on. My name's Han. I was an ex-member of a religious group, or as most people would call a very extreme group. It's a cult called Shincheonji, otherwise known as SCJ, New Heaven, New Earth. I think there's a whole bunch of other names, but those are just a few on top of my head. That's pretty much so far, yeah.
And can you summarize the beliefs and practices of this movement?
It's actually really hard to summarize fully, but the one thing that really stands out about this group and their doctrine is like they focus a lot on prophecies, right? So in the Old Testament, they start from the Old Testament and they talk about like Jesus in the first coming to fulfill a bunch of prophecies that occurred in the Old Testament, and then that's kind of very common in Christianity. But where they go a bit further is when they get to the New Testament, is where there's prophecies in the New Testament as well. And then they apply that to Revelation as well. There's a lot of prophecies in the Revelation as well. And then what they say is around, I think it was 1984, it started becoming fulfilled. I remember there was a huge timeline for it, a lot of dates. And in the Revelation, basically, it's like kind of like a script of like a prophecy, like this will happen, this will happen, this will happen, this will happen, with and specific details would match into reality, which was around 1984 when it started to begin. And since 1984 until now, I think it's year 37th now, or 38th. I don't really keep track of it anymore. But since then, they've been doing realities. So the Revelation, they say that it's been 90% fulfilled. Up until like Revelation 18, some even to 20. It's a bit vague for me to remember at this point because I left around a year ago. But basically what kind of makes them stand out is that they believe that the Revelation is currently being fulfilled. But it's not in the sense that they're taking it literally, but there's a lot of metaphors, a lot of parables that they use to interpret the Revelation. And they see that as today. That's why they work so hard. That's why they evangelize people, because they want people to know the truth. I guess I could summarize it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds the title of the group, of the movement itself, doesn't imply that it's going to be a Western or Christian based movement. So I was really surprised when I read into it a little bit to find out that it was the Old Testament and the New Testament that the movement was taking its scripture from.
Yeah, that's one of the difficult things about it is when you try to find out what Shincheonji is about online, it's actually really hard to find a reliable source. Actually, I could only find one website that tried to present what the doctrine was without any bias at all. A lot of sites would present like maybe a little bit of truth and then add a lot of exaggerations, and then other articles would just copy from that article and it just keeps repeating. So it's kind of hard to find out the truth from online. But I was able to find one site. But at the same time, it's only people from the inside could tell what was true and what was not.
Right, of
so
course,
if you're from
yeah.
the outside, it's very easy to have a misconception about it.
And how did you find yourself as a member of this group? Is this something that you would usually be born into? Is it something that goes back for generations through your family, or is it something you independently found yourself becoming a part of?
Right. Well, for myself, I was evangelized in the street. I know some people who were born into it, like their families were already in it, but their families got into it because they were evangelized on the street in the first place. So for me, I was kind of fresh out of high school, and at that time, I didn't really know what I was like wanting to do with life. So I didn't have much purpose. Still don't, still don't. But sorry, blank. So they approached me on the street one day, and at that time, like I was a very Christian person myself, but at the same time, I was also questioning my faith. So when they approached me to ask these questions about me, like, oh, what do you think about the second coming? What do you think it's going to be like? And then they just do this to kind of like make me think about it, and then make me realize, oh, I don't really think about this very often. And then they invite me to come to a Bible study, and it goes very long. Actually, when describing this group to people, there's like two different ways to describe it. There's the one where, as a student, you are like a new initiate. So for around 6 to 8 months, you're a new student. It's kind of a different experience to being a full-time member. So after you do the 6 to 8 months of Bible study, which is like 3 times a week. I hear in Korea it's like 4 or 5 times a week. But luckily, like overseas, it's not that much. So in my region, it was 3 times a week for 6 to 8 months. And once you do that, that whole course, you're a student. But then after that, you graduate and you become a full-time member. The experiences are a bit different for everybody. And whether or not you left whilst as a student or left as a full-time member, your experience will be different. So when you're hearing stories from people who left after 6 to 8 months, they don't know the full story of what it was like as a full-time member. But I was a full-time member for about 2 years, so I kind of know a bit of both. As far as I don't know, it's just what it's like to be like more higher up, because the highest I went to was like a team leader. There's hierarchies, but I could explain for a bit.
Yeah, I think that's quite common with these high controlling groups. There seems to be sort of a hierarchy, or sort of different levels or inner circles that people can become a part of. And a lot of the time, these episodes I release will get some feedback from people that says, well, I attended one service for one congregation that you're saying is a high controlling group, and it turned out that everybody was lovely. It's very different, obviously, to attend one service and leave that service and never return than it is to be a core member of the group that will dedicate hours of your week and a lot of your personal time and money or whatever else to show your commitment to that movement. So I definitely can understand what you mean by moving towards those inner circles or higher levels of responsibility or leadership within these types of movements. And did you experience any type of love bombing when you went to your first Bible study?
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. Actually, it wasn't apparent to me at first, but when I started becoming like a full-time member, we were taught like how to evangelize people, and then it became apparent to me like, oh, that happened to me, right? So it really starts in the very first moment you get evangelized. It really depends on the person evangelizing you. Some people decide to be honest and not be fake, but most people are fake, especially female evangelists. So usually it's like, oh, you like let's say there's a hobby like volleyball. Like if you a person on the street like, oh, you do volleyball, like even though if you don't like it, you have to say, oh, I like volleyball too, and then like you just have similar interests, and then you're just a bit overly exaggerating your expressions all the time, and just trying to get the person that you're trying to evangelize to be like more comfortable with you. But at the start for me, like I knew something was a bit weird, but I was just listening to what they were saying in regards to the content of the word of the doctrine. So I kind of ignored all those red flags, but there was definitely a lot of love bombing. Like when you walk into the class for the first time, teachers would greet you and they're like, oh, nice to meet you. Oh, we heard so much about you. And um, it goes so deep. But even when you're a full-time member, it still happens. But at some point, they do stop love bombing you. And if you do react a bit weirdly to that, and you start becoming like cold, they return with it. But it really depends on everyone's own experience. But for me, I could always see past it, but I try not to get affected by it because I was trying to be rational in the sense that all these emotions don't really matter. Just the doctrine, like if it makes sense, I'll follow it. But it did still take a toll on me. Yeah.
And you've used words like student, initiate, and teacher, and those phrases throughout your explaining to us what this movement is. So that's not typical in the sense of sort of preacher, pastor, and those types of words, congregants and things like that. So is this something that's unique to Shincheonji?
We don't necessarily say preacher very often. I'm not too sure why. Usually we stick to, so how it is like, there's the teacher who you meet, and then there's the instructor who teaches the whole class, right? So in a whole class, there's an instructor who's the guy who's mainly teaching. And then there's usually 3 teachers who are like the homeroom teachers, depending on how big the class would be. 2 to 4 to 5. I think the most I've seen is 6. These are the homeroom teachers, the same thing as a teacher. And then that's pretty much the one that deals with people who are educating. But for full-time members, there's also different titles for different positions. So there's congregation members. We don't really say congregants, but we just say congregation member. And then when you go a bit higher, you get a little more responsibility. You become a team leader. A little higher, group leader. A little higher, become an evangelist, which is kind of like a homeroom teacher, basically. Evangelist and homeroom teacher, same thing. It goes higher and higher, but it goes instructor, and then department leader, and then there's about 24 departments, but our region only had around 10 departments because we weren't that huge. I think that's as far as it goes. And then it goes to tribe leader and the promised pastor, who is Chongi Janim. So there's an English translation, but we're kind of encouraged to say it in Korean. So team leader is Tim Jong-nim, group leader is Gyok Janim. I may be butchering the way to say it, but there's Chonda-sanim, which is evangelist / homeroom teacher. There's Gan-sanim, which is the instructor. And then Sansung-nim is specifically only exclusive to the promised pastor, which is Lee Man-hee. We only call him Sansung-nim. That's how I'm pronouncing it so bad. I'm sorry to all your Korean viewers. But that simply just means teacher. It could apply to everyone else, other teachers, but it only applies to him. I guess it's just special to him. Maybe it has something to do with culture, but we only used it for him.
Okay, so I did a bit of research on religions in Korea because I'm not too familiar with what the primary religions or belief systems are in sort of those parts of the world. So I did Google what the main religious practices are in Korea, and it came back with Christianity and Buddhism. So I was really intrigued when I realized that a lot of these groups were referring back to Korean practices. And you've just said there that you're encouraged to say the Korean translations for the titles for people within these groups. And were any of these positions ever paid positions within the movement, or are they all done on a voluntary basis?
Yeah, so that's actually a very gray area. You don't actually get to know about that until you become like a bit higher than a 팀장님, a team leader. I believe up until team leader, everyone below that is not paid. Everything's volunteering. So for me, like I never got paid. I was going out evangelizing every single day, like doing that out of my own free time, working different jobs just to support that. But group leaders, you know, like they're not supposed to say it, but they're doing it full time. They're getting money from somewhere. I eventually found out on Reddit that they do get paid just a little bit, but just only enough to survive, and it's not even that much. So group leaders and homeroom teachers, and I believe, I'm not sure about instructors, but I'm gonna guess that the group leaders are getting it and the homeroom teachers are getting it, and the instructor is most likely getting it too. They're all getting paid as well. They have no other way of making other incomes because they're doing that pretty much every single day, every single hour of every single week. But if they were getting paid, I don't know for sure, but this is just my own observation is that people they are getting paid, but if they were getting paid, they're only getting paid for the bare minimum of surviving.
Right.
If it's rent, they'll probably live in like a place that is like a dorm, like subsidized by SCJ. So I've actually lived in one of those dorms before, and my rent was like made lower. But there was so many people living in that house, so everything's very cheap.
So when you talk about these paid positions and people that are expected to then work full-time every day in those positions to sort of make that money and to be in that position within the movement, that must mean that SCJ makes a substantial amount of money from somewhere, because this is obviously, you're only talking about your region, and I'm guessing that this, if it's coming, you know, mostly from Korea, you know, all the way to different parts of the world, it must be functioning worldwide. And if there's regions all over the world that have the same structure in place with paid positions within the movement, SCJ must make enough money to be able to support that. So what do you know about how they create their money? Is it primarily through donations or fundraising?
Yeah, so there's multiple forms of ways that they get their income. One way that they get it is through center. So center is another word for the 6 to 8 month class that you have to do. So in center, they do encourage students to pay a $60. It depends on what region you're from, but my region was like a $60 or $50 maintenance fee, which you pay every single month. The concept was it's for rent. It just helped us pay for the rent. They could have been lying or not. I never actually found out whether or not that was a lie or not, but they did offer to show us the financial reports. No one ever asked for the financial reports because there's, yeah. That was one way of getting income. Another way was through congregation members. Like, we're already going to the services every Wednesday and every single Sunday. It was up to you to donate, but some people were pressured. Like if they knew that you work, like if your leaders know that you're working, they know that you have money, they'll ask you like, oh, have you paid tithe and stuff. But for me, like I was just working the very bare minimum to survive. So they never pressured me to pay tithe. But as much as I could, I would pay tithe. 10% of your income, by the way. But they also use that one verse where it says like, oh, as much as your heart, something about like, I forgot what the verse was, but pay as much as you want, but 10% is enough. It's okay. Yeah. Apparently in my region, we had a very bad handling of finance. Like income was very slow or bad. But regardless, we had tithe and we had center fee. Another one was evangelism events. So whenever we hold an event, like a big event to invite people in, we'd always like put a $5 entry fee. It used to be $2, but as we upscaled it and we got better quality, more better quality of the events, like there'll be like live music, more props, more booths. We upped it to $5. I think it was one case where it went to $20 because we rented out like a whole school to do like a whole concert on the weekend, not whilst it was a weekday. So that was I guess that's three ways we made income. I can't really think of anything else.
It's interesting. I wonder if the people that had the paid positions were still encouraged to give some of that money back.
I give it back to whom?
To SCJ, who are giving them the money for working for them.
Right. Yeah. So yeah. So when you get money, like some people feel bad, you still have to pay it back. But I don't know. I don't know if they did that because they really want to, or because they just like the doctrine kind of made them have to do that.
Yeah.
Because it is the rule, it's like 10%.
And you've said a number of things about classes and teachers and things like that. So I'm just wondering that when you say those words to me, then it starts to sound like almost like a yoga group and not like a Bible study group. But it sounds like when you're going to these classes and you have your teachers, that you're not going to learn Bible verses and scripture. So was that a bit confusing for you when you started to go to these sessions and realize that it wasn't sort of the words they were using didn't always match up with what was happening?
It's a difficult question. I'll just talk from my own experience. Like, I really actually enjoyed the 6 to 8 month course because actually like people will say that the doctrine didn't sound or make any sense, but for me, like I felt like it really did make a lot of sense. But upon my leaving, I got to think about it more. Like I took a course in critical thinking, and I was like, oh, okay, it's kind of dumb. But when I was taking the course, everything was very basic. Like it was so basic that most of the time they could teach it in 30 minutes, but they decided to throw in a whole lot of examples and a lot of anecdotes to make it like make more sense. And so kind of I don't like saying indoctrinate because it's an extreme word, but basically they're indoctrinating you using all these extreme examples. They could just teach you in 30 minutes, but they use 2 hours instead to teach you. And then after that 2-hour lecture, you have to do another hour doing a whole review of it with the homeroom teacher. It was fun. It's hard to go unless you enjoy it. So I kind of forced myself to really enjoy it, and I sacrificed a lot of things to go to that Bible study. And it was pretty much the only thing I looked forward to every single week. And when you do it 3 times a week, you started to get used to it. Before you think 3 times a week is, oh, it's a little too much. But eventually around 3 months, that's when people start to like come in on their own time or come in a bit early or stay back a little late just to study even more. I've seen people who do that in the first month, and usually those guys are pretty crazy. I think they're still in there, but it's not as bad as you think. It's only for the people who are very skeptical that don't have a great time.
Right. And when you speak about finishing the 6 to 8 month course and then becoming sort of like a full-time member, I've read some stories and some people have reached out to me and told me that they were not informed that this was SCJ that they were joining at first. It was after that 6 to 8 month, where it's become habitual to go to these sessions, where it's become, part of your routine life, where it's fitted into your everyday, every week sort of schedule, that then they turn around and kind of lift off this veil and say, actually, this is SCJ. So did you have that experience? And if you did, sort of, what did that look like?
Yeah, so this is something that I kind of usually forget to tell people about. But yeah, when you do start the course, even from the beginning, they never tell you what the name of the group is. They didn't even implying what the name of the group is, they never do that because they don't want to risk you asking what the name of the group is. The reason why they do that is because they want you to focus only on what they're saying, like the doctrine, like make a choice for yourself rather than searching it up and seeing what all the words on the internet say about it, because on the internet it's like a whole bunch of lies, of exaggerations. And I mean, yeah, there are a few exaggerations, there's a few lies, and it's hard to separate the truth from the lies, especially when you're a new member. So what they do is they say not to look up the internet, and they don't tell them the name. That way people don't know what they're about. Because in the 6 to 8 month course, there's 3 stages. There's a beginner, intermediate, and then advanced. In the beginner, you're learning about parables, I think it was, parables. Second one, you're learning about Old Testament, First Coming. And then the third part, you're learning about New Testament / Revelation, which is when they start to reveal that they're actually Shincheonji. It's around that point that, on the third stage, it's around that point where after seeing them for 6 months, three times a week, you kind of made friends with everyone there. Everyone's love bombed you so many times that you kind of so connected to everyone there. So that's just kind of one factor that makes it hard for you to leave. That's the emotional part. And if you stayed there for 6 months, you've been discerning, you've been listening, you're like, okay, it's been right so far. Like, just revealing the name, at that point, it's hard to leave, because you said that you've accepted what they've said for the past 6 months, and they've checked on that very thoroughly throughout the 6 months before they reveal the name. So when they reveal it to you, most people aren't that shocked, but some people still are. For me, I kind of figured it out in the first month that they weren't what they were saying they were, but I never found out their name until the day before they told me. Because what I found out was that not only do they not tell you the name, but the person beside you, who is supposedly a new member, is not actually a new member. He or she is also a full-time member, but he's there checking you every step of the way.
Oh my goodness. So they have like plants then. They plant people in.
Yeah.
That's sneaky.
Yeah, and the reason why like in the beginning they never did that, but one reason why they had to do that is because sometimes students will talk to each other and think, oh, what do you think about it? What do you think about it? Right? And then when they plant someone there, they can hear that, and then they can say, okay, this student is planning some bad ideas about what they're saying to other students, so we gotta separate him from the group. So when you have a new member supposedly a new member beside you, checking up on what you're doing, you can't poison all the other new students. So for me, I had my own person, so we call them leaves. Some people just call them eyes. That's not from my region, but in my region we call them leaves. And I was a fruit. So a new student is called a fruit. So I was a fruit. I had one leaf. Actually, I had 2 leaves. Nowadays, since there's more people, there's more time to have. There's more people to have more leaves. So nowadays, I've seen groups of 2 to 3 leaves for one fruit at a time, and they would like pretty much just check up on this person all the time, like as a new student. That way, they feel more initiated, more comfortable, and oh man, it goes so deep. There's a group chat for every single student. I had my own group chat, and I've been in multiple group chats for other fruits. I've probably been a leaf for over 10 students, 20 students or so.
Oh my goodness,
And
that's wild.
Yeah.
That's wild. So, and how do you feel about that now that you're no longer a member? How do you feel about kind of being a part of that system that is in place to use the word that you don't want to use, but purely indoctrinate people?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I can see from normal. So for me, I wasn't that shocked when I found out, because I knew from the beginning that this guy's definitely not a new member. Like, he's asking me some weird questions, but I knew he wasn't a new member. But I tried not to let him affect me. I was just focusing on what the person was saying. I was trying to not let emotion divide me, but it still did have a factor in me staying. But I tried to do my best to focus on the doctrine itself. But for most people, when it's revealed, at the same time, when the name of Shincheonji is revealed, the leaves are also revealed as well. Like, oh, we weren't actually new time members. We're like, yeah. But the way they explain it is like, oh, we did this because we loved you. We didn't want you to go through this journey alone. We wanted to like guide you. Like you were blind, but we could see, and we felt so sorry for you. We wanted to guide you all the way. So don't feel bad for us, but we're sorry that we had to do this, but it was for your own spiritual health.
No, that makes
Basically,
me so
you become
uncomfortable.
grateful to.
Yeah, and then you're
Yeah,
almost thanking them for basically like,
yeah. People think
oh,
it's uncomfortable, but once you know them for over 6 months and you become like close, like the closest best friends ever, like you don't really feel weird about it because that's your friend.
a quick message from this week's sponsor. Paranormal horror author Eve S. Evans introduces a brand new spine-chilling release, True Ghost Stories of First Responders, available on Amazon today. First responders with any real time on the job believe in ghosts. They've experienced events they can't otherwise explain. Same with other professions that deal with injuries, accidents, or death. Police officers, firemen, 911 operators, they've seen the worst that people can do to one another, and they've all had brushes with the unexplained. Don't believe in ghosts? This book might change your mind and steal any hope of sleep. These stories are unexplainable. True accounts from first responders, police officers, firemen, and 911 operators told from the perspective of everyday people. Every single tale between these covers is 100% true. Think you can explain them? We dare you to try. If you delight in ghostly books and material, feel free to also check out Eve's podcast, Bone-Chilling Tales to Keep You Awake, for weekly true paranormal creepy stories, available on Apple and all major podcasting networks, and is also available on YouTube as a narrated and animated experience.
So it is very confusing. It is very confusing.
Yeah,
And most people
especially
figure out that people with common sense, they can figure out around the 4th or 5th month that something's a bit weird about the person sitting next to me. And they can figure out, oh, okay, maybe this person's not a full-time member, but they don't say anything. They don't say anything. They're just like, oh, just focus on the word, focus on the word. So when the reveal happens, they're kind of already mentally prepared for it. But most people who don't have that much common sense, they are pretty shocked for about a week. I've heard of one case where a very close friend of mine, later on she became a good member. She was shocked for like a whole month and like, kind of crying about it, like, oh, I can't believe she did that to me. And then so from that sort of like, oh, that was kind of creepy, weird, she became slowly grateful to the person.
no, her initial reaction I feel like is the right reaction to have though. That obviously that you're in a room with these people that you've been around for such a long period of time, and you know they're saying to you, we did this for you, we didn't do this for us. But the fact that there are so many techniques being used here for sort of coercive control. You've got the withholding information that this is actually SCJ, that you can kind of go and research on things like the subreddit if you wanted to, and read stories that might not paint this movement in the best light. But also you've got people around you who are in place to, from their point of view, to make sure that you're not poisoning, as you said, the rest of the group members with how you might think or feel about the scripture or the classes. But also, if you were having doubts and you were thinking, do you know what, I went to a different group this week and I'm kind of more inclined to agree with their beliefs and practices than I am with this, you've got like 2 or 3 people in your ear then who are then going to encourage you and love bomb you, who you think are just at the same class, at the same level as you, who have had the same exposure and experience to SCJ that you've had, and they go, no, this is the best thing ever. And then you're like, oh, well, if everyone thinks that this is the best thing ever, then obviously I'm doing something wrong, or I need to give it more time because there's something that everybody else here is seeing that I'm not seeing. But the whole time, that's what they've been put there to do, to put those ideas into your head. So that is oh, I don't know, that makes me feel so uncomfortable thinking about it.
Yeah, I don't know what the word is, the specific word for the bias. It's like something about the majority, like, oh, the majority agrees and, oh, it must be right. So
Yeah.
that's the thing, like when you're in class, when you see the half the members are real, like are real students, and half the other members are like full-time members but posing as new students. When half the members are all nodding like, wow, oh yeah, this makes sense, you know, like the other half just naturally follows. So that I think it's like, I forgot the name for the bias, but there's a bias in that oh, everyone else is nodding, oh, I'm going to nod as well. So in the
I
sense
think
that
it's
when the reveal,
I talked about this in one of my first episodes when I was explaining the word cult and where the word cult comes from, then the etymology of the word. And I actually talked about the Solomon Asch conformity experiment, where
conformity, yes.
he's asking everybody to answer a question, and everybody else in the room apart from one participant is in on the experiment. So he asks them, like, you know, what's the longest piece of string, for example, and they all point to the shortest one, and the one guy in the room that's not part of the experiment is kind of then agreeing with them, even though it's obvious that he knows that that's not the answer. So yeah, I mean, that just goes to show that when you use those types of tactics, it's going to benefit SCJ's favor in terms of keeping those people on board for the 6 to 8 months where they're going to be open to coming back as full-time members and pay the subscription, I would call it. You mentioned that you joined kind of out of high school as well, and that this movement started kind of making headway at around 1984. So this is definitely what I think is kind of like a new religious movement. It's relatively fresh, and it's my understanding as well, and I could be wrong here, but the majority of people who are targeted to be evangelized on the street are people of that sort of demographic and age group that you were when you were approached. So people who are in university, there's like campus evangelizing, college evangelizing, lots of young, fresh minds who are potentially in that transition period from kind of education to employment or education to further education, and kind of asking those questions like, what am I going to do with my life? Where am I going to go? Who am I going to be? Where do I want to live? How am I going to move out from my parents' house? Or how am I going to pay my rent this month? And it's almost those young worldly people who are approached by SCJ and brought into the movement. Is that, would you agree with that, or would you say that that's maybe I've just only spoken to one demographic of people involved?
No, that's very right, because around like young adults like 18 to 24 to sometimes 30, if you're still at that age, like where you haven't matured that much. From the outside perspective, it makes sense that they evangelize those type of people, because at that age, like, you still haven't figured out what you want to do for life, and you're still wanting purpose. You're still very naive. You don't know much about the world, right? But from the inside, how we reason about it, why we only evangelize young people. We don't only evangelize young people, but we focus. Our main target is younger people, because we are building God's kingdom, right? And to build God's kingdom, we need a lot of energy, right? And people who are from 18 to 24, uni students at that age, they have so much time, right? And because they have so much time and they also have so much energy, they are the most perfect people to be the workers, the full-time workers for this kingdom of heaven, right? And because we want this kingdom of heaven to come down as soon as possible, for the revelation to be fulfilled as soon as possible, we need full-time workers, right? So they focused only on young people the most, because that was kind of our reason. Like, we want this to happen as soon as possible. We want the kingdom of heaven to come down now.
And that's how SCJ would word it and phrase it to you as people going out to evangelize. Nothing to do with, as you said, the naivety of maybe some people at that age, or their lack of exposure to the world, because, you know, when you come out of high school, maybe you haven't had the opportunity to travel to different countries and be parts of different cultures, or had much exposure to different political and religious beliefs and opinions on the internet, or you know, all you kind of know is your echo chamber from your high school and from your friends in your education system. So it's nothing to do with that. It's purely because of the energy of 18 to 21-year-olds.
I mean, I think for me, I had a bit of common sense. I was like, okay, it's that, but also it's because people are not that smart at 18. I wasn't that smart. I kind of kicked myself a lot of times because at that age, I didn't really know much about religion, and I didn't really know about like these shady groups that don't tell you their name at the beginning.
Yeah.
I was like always very happy-go-lucky. I still am kind of. I was like, oh, it's a cool new experience. I just new people. I can talk to these new people. So I was very naive in the sense that I was very easily trusting these people. I wish I took a course in critical thinking before I went into SCJ. It was only during and after like, the last 3 months of me being in there that I started really like looking into critical thinking and reading a bunch of philosophy and atheist literature, that I started to really think for myself. What is this doctrine? Like, what is the logic that goes behind it? What's the reasoning? Is that really reliable?
And I mean, how did you end up in the position of team leader? And then you moved into a dorm as well. I'm just interested on how that kind of developed.
I wasn't a team leader for very long. Actually, I was only a team leader for like a week. But it was so much, like you're already spending so much time as a congregation member in SCJ that when you become a team leader, it's just like you're spending even more time. Like it's not like you're spending all your time, but you're just cutting off your sleep when you become a team leader. So from that point, I was kind of like, so they introduced this new concept at that time where there's a team leader and then there's like a minor team leader where you're kind of like an apprentice, learning to be like a team leader. So I was at that point. So I was like very temporary, but I was learning all the scripts, what to say and how to say it. It was very hard for me to get to that point, but as I was like reading all the scripts, I still have some of the documents and the scripts that you have to say. So when I say scripts, it's like when you're teaching a lesson, it's just basically the flow and the structure of your conversation, what you want to say, the reason why you're saying it, and the examples you want to use. When I was seeing like the structure and trying to practicing it for myself, it did feel unnatural for myself. But then I was like really questioning to myself, okay, what if they ask me this? What if they ask me this? And then I was like, what if I ask them this? What are they going to say? And then I started like asking those questions and I didn't get the answers I wanted, most of which were like atheist questions. So it goes a bit deeper. I don't know if you want to hear that part.
Yeah, I mean, okay. You tell me what you want to tell me.
Okay, well, when I started looking at the teachings and the doctrines from like a different perspective, when they teach you in the beginning, we screen a lot of the people who come to the lessons. Like you have to be a Christian already. You have to be a local citizen. That way you can stay longer. You can grow this local church. You have to not be traveling anywhere anytime soon. That way, no complications when you're in the course. I think it was the fourth one, but I'm not too sure. But the first one was like you have to be Christian, right? Because they don't really want to waste time with atheists. Because the reason was, there's nothing I can say to make them believe. Like they have to believe in the cross. Like they have to stay through the whole course to really understand. But atheists are like impatient. And I was like, okay, yeah, makes sense, whatever. I was a Christian to begin with, but everything that they were teaching was under the basis that you already believed that the Bible was 100% reliable. Right? So that's actually the first lesson that I was learning, and I was learning that lesson. Like the objective is the person has to understand for themselves that the Bible is 100% reliable. But I went to question like, oh, but what if it isn't? There's so many contradictions in the Old Testament prophecies as well. And I brought that up, and they didn't answer it at all. They were more concerned about the intention of my question. Like, why am I asking this? Like, are you just trying to find faults in the Bible? But they never answered my question. Like, okay, what is inconsistencies? Why should we be like trusting the scripture and taking it all word for word if like there's all these inconsistencies and all these contradictions? I didn't get the answers I wanted, and I started questioning that about 8 months before I left, and I felt a bit weird about it. And then 2 months after I initially asked it, I asked it again. Didn't get the same. I got the same answer, but I wasn't satisfied. And then it slowly climaxed until the quarantine in my region for COVID. That I started. Okay, I have a lot of time to think to myself.
Yeah.
I've caught up on all my sleep. I can think a little more clearly now. I'm going to ask these questions more deeper, and I need an answer. And that was when I started reading a lot more atheist literature and looking into like prophetic arguments. Because the thing is, if you're trying to leave SCJ, I've seen it on the Reddit, people try to leave using a Christian route, but it just doesn't work. If you go from an atheist perspective, it's just more logical. People can disagree, it's a bit controversial, but I find it's the most logical way to leave.
A quick word from one of this week's sponsors. Nothing is more dangerous to love's future than past emotions. Mark and Susan are from different worlds but have one commonality: emotional baggage. Having lost his wife and business partner of 20 plus years, Mark struggles to find purpose in life, living on proceeds from selling his company. Mark has little financial sense for money's value. However, soon after moving to Colorado, this reckless streak is destined to change when he meets Susan. Educated and wise, Susan has always lived a comfortable yet ordinary existence. Upon meeting Mark, their connection is strong, but Mark's financial indifference proves a source of increasing conflict. Furthermore, Susan herself is haunted. The dark relationships left behind have found a way back into her world, as moving away doesn't always equate to truly moving on. When Susan's daughter is made a pawn by her vengeful ex, Mark's money may indeed make all the difference. Can newfound love withstand the emotional roller coaster? The new book Aspen, A Love Story by T.K. Lucaith, available on Amazon today. Romantic, intellectual, emotive and inspiring, this is a story for the mind and soul, both disciplined and free.
Because you're approaching it from logic. It's not in the sense that you're leaving because you don't have faith. Because from an atheist perspective, faith is like, it's not based on evidence, right? So I was leaving from that perspective, and it was pretty easy after that point because I never considered it before, and I didn't think it would be that easy because I know how hard it is to leave from a Christian perspective. And it was only until I left that I really started considering maybe atheists have something right, like with their viewpoint. And I realized they didn't have much answers for it.
You think that? Would you say that it was around that time that you began asking those questions that you had, enough doubt to start to move away from the movement? And then, as you said, it's interesting that once you had some sleep and time to yourself and a clear head and maybe sort of like less of a schedule committed to SCJ because of the COVID and the lockdown, that you were able to get enough distance from them to be able to say those doubts that I've had actually are more than I thought. Now that I'm a bit more clear-headed, I know that this is something that I want to move away from.
Yeah, so when I originally had those doubts, I thought like, oh no, this is just Satan trying to deceive me. So I tried to put it down. So I tried to distract myself with as many tasks as possible. And at that time, I was like part of a team that involves serving all the food, making sure the food is right, like serving for the services, for the events that happen. So I was already busy, so busy to the point that I didn't have time to ask questions. I only had time to study, attend center for other fruits as a leaf, attend services and attend group meetings and team meetings, and oh my god, there was so many meetings. It was so hard to find time to meet somebody, meet a teacher who's also very busy in their schedule, to meet that person and ask questions. At the same time, trying to get 6 hours of sleep. Like most of the time, I only had 4 hours of sleep. So either sacrifice your sleep and ask questions or get more sleep. I usually chose to get more sleep. At the same time, you also need to juggle. Like for me, I had to get a job as well. Like I had 3 jobs at the time. I had to juggle them. Most of the time, I'd lose like 1 or 2 and get a new job. It's very stressful. Like the last thing on your mind is to ask questions.
And I suppose as well, if you are in that sort of state of exhaustion, then you're almost in like a trance like state where you're kind of just going from A to B to C to D, and you're not thinking about the lessons or being a leaf and the true intentions behind that sort of thing. You're just kind of there like almost like a zombie, like tired, like I just need to get through this next thing, then goes this next thing, then it goes this, and you're kind of just living from one experience to the next instead of living and experiencing these things from one event to the next. So that must be, I wonder how many other people have had that experience where they've had a chance to have some time to themselves and get some good sleep and eat some good meals, and then kind of think to themselves, like you have, like, so maybe something's not quite right.
I believe during COVID, like, so in my region, we had a lockdown for about, I think I counted about like 60 days or 30 days. It wasn't that long, but it was long enough for people to catch up on sleep and have regular meals. So I know it wasn't just me, because so we use Telegram, which is like an app, to basically our communication app. And I did, most people when they leave, they delete their accounts, but I didn't delete my account. And nowadays I still have it. I still keep track of all the members. No, I can't keep track of all of them. Like sometimes they change their names or just change their profiles. But I can see that some are deleted, right? There are some people who have left. And some of these people I have met on the street, just randomly. I'm like, oh, did they know I left? Like, and then at the same time in their head, they could be thinking like, oh, did they know I left? Like, so it's just like, you have to break that ice. Like, I don't know if they're full-time members still or whether or not they left, but I just have to ask, because usually when people leave, ours is a bit different, but when people leave, they really don't want to talk to anyone from SJ ever again. So even when I left, no one knew I left, because they don't want to announce that, because if they do, other people are going to think, oh, maybe I should leave too, right? So It's really hard to find out whether or not someone left or not. So for me, whenever I meet someone who has recently left or has left since COVID, I always ask them like, oh, okay, like, do you know anyone else who left? Because I know what it was like leaving and how hard it was.
Yeah.
And I wish so hard that someone was there for me. So I asked them like, oh, do you know anyone else who left? Because if they need help, like, I just want to be there.
I think that's the best approach as well, isn't it? I mean, that's the most helpful approach, and I know I always talk about the subreddits for these movements and ex members that go to these subreddits for support, but they really are places where people can get advice, answers to questions that maybe they're not too sure about, peer support for people who have been through or are going through similar experiences, and it's also interesting to just read the differences and similarities between the different groups across different parts of the world. These groups that have had similar experiences and groups that have had different experiences depending on the number of members, or sometimes the restrictions in place seem to be more severe in some parts of the world than they are in others. Do you recall any restrictions that were in place in terms of sort of what you can eat and drink, or what you should wear, or who you should associate with outside of SCJ, things like that?
Yeah, there's a lot to say there. Yeah, so I'll start with like what you eat. There wasn't any restrictions in what you eat. Like you could eat pork. Like that wasn't like that was more of a metaphorical thing. Like you should, like, I forgot what it was, but you can eat pork. But most of the time, people were not only sleep deprived, but they were also not starving, but they didn't eat. Like most people didn't eat, like, because we sleep so little that when we wake up, we're pretty much almost late for the meeting we have to attend in that morning. So we don't have time for breakfast. And when we get to that meeting, we have to start evangelizing. And most people, it can fit in one meal a day. Yeah, for me, I was lucky I could fit in 1 or 2. a few snacks here and there, but there was no restriction with eating. But when you did eat, it's like most of the time you didn't have time to eat because you're just like so busy. But it only takes 10, like if you can eat a whole meal in 10 minutes, then you're fine. But most people were just so busy that they couldn't eat. And also with what you wear, I think women had it a lot harder because, you know, you can't wear anything that reveals your shoulders. I wasn't a woman, obviously, but so I didn't receive that education. But whenever we had like an outdoor event, there was always that like rules, like, oh, women like don't wear anything revealing. So it's very obvious. Like now I can see it. Like whenever I go to the beach and I see a whole group of young people, like and the girls aren't like there's no shorts. I can tell they're probably from some Christian group. You know, not necessarily a cult. But you know, it makes sense. But on Wednesdays and Sundays, we're encouraged to like, okay, not Wednesdays. On Sundays, we're encouraged to wear all white, like black pants, yeah, but you always wear a white button up and always bring your tie. So each region has their own tribe, and each tribe has their own colored tie. So you should always have that tie with you. In my region, it was the Peter tribe. So our region was a very light blue. We call it Jasper. Yeah, so I always had to wear that tie on Sunday. For members, full-time members, there wasn't really much regulation in what you wear. But if you were going to be a teacher, which also means that you're most likely, if you're a Tim Jungnim, which is a team leader, you're most likely a teacher as well. And everything up from there, group leader, instructors had the worst. But team leaders and above, you always had to wear something smart, casual, or formal. Instructors, because they're teaching every single day, they always had to wear suits. I actually lived with an instructor, and like he would always tell me how much he hates wearing a suit because he always has to wear it. He gave me his jumper. Actually, this is one of his sweater I'm wearing right now is from him. He said he doesn't wear it because like it doesn't fit with the suit. It's like he never had time to wear it, so he just gave it to me.
And what about like if you forgot to wear a light blue tie, or you know, or you went and as an instructor and you didn't wear a suit, what would be the type of fallout around those?
I'm not too sure about the instructor part because usually they're smart enough not to forget that because they've been there for so long. But if you forgot your tie, most likely another member always has another tie. So I was in a group chat for all the male members. We call it like the brothers chat, my brother sister. But we had a brothers chat, and like we'd always message like, oh, anyone got a tie? And it's like, yeah, I got a tie. Like someone always has a spare tie, right? But if you didn't have there was no spare ties, you'd always have to sit at the back because there's a camera at the front just recording the sermon. So they want the people at the front to look the best. So if you don't have a tie, you're at the back, basically.
Okay, so all of the sermons are recorded.
Yes.
That's interesting.
Some people they don't attend, but they don't tell you that they don't attend. You just notice that that person's not there, but they don't tell anyone that they're not there. So when they don't attend, they have to catch up, so they watch the sermon. Yeah.
And what about things like the LGBTQIA community? How are they represented within SCJ?
Yeah, so they're very iffy about that. They don't make any statements about it, and they only teach it until like you got in like fully inside. Usually they screen you at the very start to see if you're either like gay or les from the very start, because I asked about this when I became a full-time member. Most of the time it doesn't hit people like, oh, I never asked them, like, what do we think about that? So when I entered the church, I asked about it, and my homeroom teacher at the time, she said that they're not considered natural, right? Because they believe ever since Satan, I forgot the actual wording for it, but basically ever since sin came, Satan came as well, and people are sinning, and this is just another product of it. It's like this people who are unnatural. So we don't want to evangelize these people.
It's very interesting that that's the perspective that SCJ has when their primary targeting demographic is the 18 to 21 bracket, because obviously in this day and age around the world, increasingly, people are being encouraged to live life authentically to themselves. So there is obviously an increase in the amount of people who are coming forward and saying, this is how I identify. And if it doesn't conform with SCJ, I imagine there's a huge group of people who are either suppressed within the movement or who have been overlooked and could make SCJ's numbers significantly higher, but they just don't want members of the LGBTQIA community as part of their movement, which is like, whatever, fine then, we don't want to join anyway, kind of thing. But it's to me it's just interesting that obviously the younger generations are more open to each other. I feel like yeah, definitely. I feel like where I live in the world, in Liverpool here in England, and I think I've said this once or twice before, you know, if a really long bearded man walked past me in a dress, you wouldn't even look twice, because everybody's kind of so culturally and socially and ethnically different here in Liverpool, but it's accepted. It's not a strange thing. It's kind of what makes Liverpool so beautiful and such a great community and such a great city to be a part of, because you can kind of express yourself however you want, and everyone's kind of like, yeah, cool, you just do you. And I feel like that's becoming, I don't know if this is just my echo chamber, but I feel like that's becoming more of a theme throughout different parts of the world as well, with people I connect with in different countries and different regions who are kind of saying the same thing and seeing the same thing that I'm seeing, especially towards the younger people. Obviously there's still the older generations who are kind of I don't understand homosexuality,
conservative.
Yeah, who are kind of just like, well, when I was younger it was illegal to be in a same-sex relationship. But obviously we don't really have that so much, especially in the Western world, but we don't have that so much anymore. So it's weird that SCJ have that stance, yet their target demographic is kind of
so also part
adults.
of our target is like, obviously we're only evangelizing Christians. Most of the time Christians are like, there are some Christians who are open and accept to the LGBTQ community, but there are some Christians who are very like discreet and silent about it, but they are not very accepting of it. And
I didn't even consider that. I completely forgot the Christianity side of it for a second. And so you're right, that is the sort of doctrine and belief system that most Christians would be brought up with, so that kind of does make more sense.
I mean, like, some people still do seep through the screening process. An ex-member before me who left, he left because like he actually was like very like, he didn't announce it to anybody, but he was silently gay, and he knew that was wrong, but he knew that he wouldn't be able to be in SCJ because of that, so he left on his own accord. But I asked my leaders about it. It's like, oh, okay, if that was the reason, like, is there anything we could have done about it? And like my leader said, like, oh yeah, there's a process for it. So in Melbourne, apparently like they had the same thing happen, but someone like was open about it, and they said, oh, there's like sort of, it sounds a bit very culty, but there's a education for it. It's like, oh, they kind of trained them not to think those thoughts, and it's like, oh, okay, it's like, I understand it's not natural and stuff. So in Melbourne they had a system for it, but here he didn't announce it. And maybe, I think that, okay, there's one guy who's low-key gay. I think everyone knows it, but he's still a member. But there's a system for it in Melbourne, but here not yet, I don't believe.
That's I for Pride Month last year I did a thing around conversion therapy and the history of conversion therapy, and I don't, when the member said, oh no, he left, is there anything we could have done, it's probably like, yeah, change your views and policies around those members, the LGBT members of the group. And good for the person that left, because he realized there wasn't anything else that they could do, and that they wouldn't have agreed with his lifestyle, because at least then if he moves away from SCJ, he has the potential to live happily as he should, instead of kind of repressing anything about himself. So hopefully there'll be more people like that.
I catch up with him now and then. Like we're both pretty happy with how life is now.
Oh, good. I'm good.
We wish to,
so you're still in touch with some people.
Meet other members as well. Yeah. I mean, there are some members that I meet like who left as well. Some of which are a little bit still traumatized. So I'm very careful in a way of how I speak with them, because we're so skeptical to the point that we still think that ex-members are actually members in disguise.
Of course, yeah, of course.
To be ex-members, yeah. So even when I meet with my friend, like we're still scared. Like, are you still a member? It's like, nah.
Yeah, let me just check you for a wire.
Yeah, because like the 6 to 8 months course when we had to leave, like that's just like we're not really sure like if the person next to us is really who they say they are. So it's just kind of like we're just more skeptical now because of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that we were sort of an hour off schedule today, so we don't have as much time as we hoped we would have to chat. So I just wanted to ask you really, what has your life been like since you left, and what advice do you give to others who are thinking about doing the same?
I'll be honest, because on Reddit I think Reddit's like, you have to be very careful with what you read, because some posts do make sense and some posts are very like pretty dumb. I can think of 2 users that make up some really dumb posts. I'm probably the only one who says they're really dumb, so it's very obvious to know who this user is and who I am. But for me, when I left, it was like depends on the person, but post SCJ depression lasts for a while. The most I've seen and heard is 2 years. But for me, the first 6 months after leaving was like, man, okay, the first 4 months was hell. Not really hell, but it's just like, I was really happy that I left during COVID and lockdown, because whilst I'm being like sad and depressed, everyone else is being sad and depressed, and they're behind in life as well. So it's like, I don't feel too bad. So I'm happy that happened during that time. But you're kind of without purpose, and you have to learn for yourself, like, okay, well, what is my own purpose? And if you choose to be a Christian still, or any other religion, you can latch into that. But for me, I decided to go the Agnostic Atheist approach, and I read a lot. I delved in a lot of philosophy. My advice is just read a lot. Like if you're going to take my approach, read a lot of atheist literature, and look into the arguments regarding like Christianity versus Muslim or atheism. Just have an open mind for it all. For me, the books I read were from Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins is very helpful, but one YouTube channel that really helped me a lot was Cosmic Skeptic. I'm so grateful to him because, man, he makes some really good arguments. Cosmic Skeptic. I know he goes to Oxford University. He's in the UK. So like, I don't know if you can. There's a shout out to Cosmic Skeptic. I'm so thankful to him because without him, I probably would not have the arguments to withstand the indoctrination that I had. But instead of, you can be depressed for a while, mourn over what could have been, which is the kingdom of heaven. Mourn over it. Have some time to yourself, but after that, like really learn how to take care of yourself and find that purpose for yourself in your own life. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic way of kind of putting your thoughts into perspective, especially because a lot of people will often say, take this approach, take that approach. A lot of people advocate therapy, but what you've said there, I think, is something that's not mentioned too much, which is, mourn over the things that you were promised, because a lot of these movements and coercive control groups and groups with high control tactics will be offering something that you can't get anywhere else in the world. And it's something that you've set your heart, your life, your mind, all of your goals on achieving. So I think it's important to remember that you're walking away from the possibility that could be your life as well. And that's not something that's often mentioned in the sort of advice section of these interviews. So I think that's a really good point to raise. You are leaving that behind, as well as the friends that you've made that have become like family and become so familiar to you, you know, and that routine and that schedule that you're leaving behind as well, that is so ingrained in human nature, that we're kind of taught routines from the day we're born as babies, then go through school, then go through employment, you know, you work 9 to 5 and things like that. So you kind of, not only are you leaving that behind, but you are leaving the dream behind of being part of what that religion had promised you, or what that movement had promised you. So I think that's a really interesting and important thing to remember. So is there anything else that you would like to tell our listeners before we say goodbye today?
I just want to add on to that, like just from what I just said, but self-help and journaling. But for most people, I do recommend go to therapy. Like I was just one of the lucky ones, but genuinely just go to therapy. It'll help you so much. If you can't journal everything that happens, like just recount everything, because it ends all those negative loops in your head. Go to therapy if you can. If you can't afford it, most university students, like, they get free counseling at uni. So just go to therapy. No, don't feel bad about it. Like, you deserve it.
Mm-hmm.
Last note is just everyone should learn how to be a critical thinker. It's my good end part.
I think that's yeah. I mean, there must be so many. I bet there's a ton of free online courses for critical thinking, that people can access freely if they have opportunities to do so. I know it's not the easiest thing for everybody to have free access to the internet in some parts of the world, and therapy as well. We talk a lot about how that's not often a resource that's available to everybody, but yes, critical thinking. I think if you have the opportunity to read any articles or topics or courses online, or read a book, then I think that's a really sound piece of advice as well. So it's very late where you are now and very early where I am, and this is my first morning interview, so it's been a bit of a turnaround, bit of a change of events for me. So I am going to let you go. Obviously you're out in public, which is great. I'm stuck at home because we're in lockdown still. So there's a difference between how your country has managed this virus and how ours has managed this virus. So I'm gonna let you go and get home. And I just wanted to say a massive thank you, Han, for coming here, trusting me with your stories, giving me sort of it's honestly, it's a privilege to be able to sit here and listen to to listen to your story, especially when you talk about being a person that has common sense and had doubts about this movement from the start, but wanted to believe in the doctrine and wanted to just look at the doctrine without using kind of emotion. And I think that's just you're probably one of many people who do the same thing, where you kind of realize that something's not quite right, and you're obviously highly intelligent, and you're thinking, yeah, I mean, I don't know about that, so I'll kind of just, but at the same time, you're still allowing yourself to become part of this process. And I think that's so important for the listeners, because a lot of people blame themselves, and a lot of people have these thoughts and feelings of guilt towards themselves that they've allowed this indoctrination to happen to them. But I think you've just told us here that you can have these doubts from the very start. You can you can think to yourself, something's not quite right, but I kind of do believe in the scriptures and the doctrine that I'm being told. And obviously you've been love bombed and all those extra layers of things on top. So you can be a person that starts off with a marginal amount of critical thinking or doubt, or kind of notices the red flags and things that aren't right, but you can still end up being in a movement like this for a number of years before something happens like a COVID lockdown, where you get to take that step back and say, actually, hang on, I was right from the start. So I do appreciate you coming forward and allowing people to hear that story, giving people that information, and hopefully going forward, any other members who have had similar experiences can take sort of some inspiration and advice from you, and hopefully find just a small period of time to take for themselves to sit down and have that break and see what happens. So just thank you so much, Han, for your time, and I really hope you enjoy your evening and get lots of sleep tonight.
Yeah. I still have someone to meet after this.
Oh, you do? Yeah, you're meeting somebody for that's, oh my goodness, I've forgotten what that's like. I'll stay on the Zoom call. And I'll just live that experience through you and your camera.
I honestly, I miss lockdown, because there was so much time to do and learn things, but now it's there's no lockdown.
Well, this podcast was born in lockdown, but at the same time, our lockdowns lasted basically a year now, so I think we're all very much sick of it. If it only lasted like a 30 days or so, maybe I'd be like, oh, it was so nice when we were all just at home together, but now I'm ready for it to end. So any other
I think you still might miss a few things about it, but a year's a long time.
Any other UK listeners are probably feeling the same. I feel you, especially if you're in Wales, because their lockdown has been strict. So I'll have to wait and see if anybody gets in touch to tell me that their lockdown is giving them cabin fever as well. So enjoy your drinks, Han, enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you so much, and I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
That is the end of this week's episode. If you'd like to get in touch, you can do so by following me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, and this has been the Cult Vault.
Hey, it's Megan Trainor for Profile by Sanford. Life's really full these days with rehearsing, performing, writing music, and balancing family. I need a nutrition plan that's easy to follow. I need one-on-one nutrition coaching. With nearly 200,000 members nationwide, Profile is transforming lives with one-on-one nutrition coaching and customized plans. Profile has a plan for me, and Profile has a plan for you. Doctor-developed and science-backed. Find your plan at profileplan.com today.